Hi, I'm Preston Poor. I'm recently retired from the Coca-Cola Company, and I've gone into a speaking business. I've written a book, and really just trying to talk to people about how to live their faith out in the workplace. I became a Christian and accepted the Lord into my life and surrendered to Him back in 1980. So I was in, after 7th grade, I went to a junior high ministry, heard the gospel, heard it a few times, and responded. And so I've been a Christian over 40 years. My son actually has been coming here to Purpose on Tap. And he mentioned to Alicio that I had written a book about faith, and thought I might be a great opportunity and speaker to come for this Wednesday night, so that's why I got invited. Hey, there's one key takeaway for tonight. I want people to learn about how they can grow closer to the Lord through discipleship, and then He will work in them and through them to be a redemptive influence in their workplace. All right. Thank you, Alicia.
Absolutely.
Man, that was one of the most awesome and quickest and easiest introductions I've ever been under. Fantastic. How is everybody doing tonight? Can you hear me okay with the mic? I got to get the switch on. You'll be able to hear me over the air conditioning real quick. Good. Good evening. Is that better? Okay, good. Hey, I want to do a couple things before I get started tonight. Number one, thank you for investing time with me to be here. My hope and prayer for you is that you'll walk away with something of value that you can go off and apply. I also want to thank Matthew and Alicio who are here tonight. Alicio connected with my son Benton, who is here tonight, and has been to Purpose on Tap and brought some of his friends from his Wing Wednesday study that they do. So thank you for being here, guys, tonight. And I asked them not to leave me high and dry when there's a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to expect questions from the peanut gallery over there when that happens. And then lastly, I want to recognize a couple friends that are here. My good friend Rick Manzo, who is we've gone through some discipleship stuff together in the past. And thank you for being here, his friend Stu. And then my good friend Stan Lanier as well. Let's start with the end in mind. Have you ever heard that before? Starting with the end in mind? These are Jesus' words that are John 4:14. They're out of a translation called The Message. And it's this. Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again." He was standing in front of a well with a woman, and they were pulling up a bucket of water to drink water and pulling it out. And he said to her, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. But anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst. Not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life." Those were Jesus' words. And there was a phrase in there that caught my attention. It was artisan spring. Artisan spring. You know what an artisan spring is? It's where there's water underneath granite and it has to shoot up and forces through, and that's where the spring starts, and that's where you get some water from that. But my question to you is, in your life, and I want to share a story with you, what happens if that spring stops flowing? It goes to a trickle, and that water is just not flowing like it should be. That happened to me. I want to share a quick story here with you. I remember a long time ago when I was working, I'm just retired from the Coca-Cola Company, and I had just been promoted 6 months ago to a new role. I had a couple of teammates and working along, and I was a top performer in the organization, and I was kicking butt and just doing a good job. And I had 2 associates for me. And I remember stepping into the room there, in the conference room, and it was January, and we were about to do a year-end appraisal. And Gretchen was on the other line there. And she said the words that I didn't want to hear. As we started the appraisal, she said, "Preston, we don't even need to do this. I've thought about this for a while." And said, "You're condescending and you're a jerk. I quit." Those are very hard words to hear. That was the second associate that had quit on me in 6 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I've been trying to work with her. We'd had a tenuous relationship because she wasn't a top performer like I was. I was trying to make her be like I was. It was just a tough situation. And I went into my manager's office that afternoon with my tail tucked between my legs. And I told Debbie, I said, "Debbie, here's the skinny. Here's what's happened. Another associate's quit, and I don't know what to do." There was a long, pregnant pause. And she looked at me and she said, "Preston, you're a top performer. You're good on the what, You deliver for the company. You're an asset to the company. But the how you treat people, it's got to change. You will never, never excel in this organization unless you learn how to work with and through people. All kinds of things are going through my mind when I heard that. That's hard to hear when you're a young professional coming up and you think you're doing a great job. And I couldn't really make the transition from manager to leader. As a matter of fact, I wrote something in my journal I want to share with you. I wrote this. It said, "My heart is heavy today. I feel crushed. The past few weeks were difficult. Another employee quit. I received feedback on my condescending tone, inability to shift roles from manager to leader. And overall, I have a feeling of devaluation. My manager continues to dissect every comment I make, criticize my actions, and this year's been a valley of despair. I feel torn, and I feel weak." It's tough. Those are my thoughts that I wrote down in my journal all those years ago. And I don't know if you've been there before, if you've struggled before, but it took me a long time to learn how to ultimately live out my faith in the workplace. That water, that river that I mentioned in the scripture had shut off. And I was more of a burden to people than I was a blessing. So I want to ask you, if you maybe struggle with that a little bit or know somebody tonight, listen up, because I'm going to come with a little bit of advice and hopefully you'll have something to take away from that. But tonight for you, if there was a way for you to learn how to live out your faith in the workplace and make a positive impact, would you want to know about that?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the amen back there. That's a good thing. Let's go to the next slide real quick. And we're going to do this old-fashioned. We don't have a clicker, so I'm going to have Zach back there do the clicking. Here's an interesting statistic for you. You will be consumed 90 hours of work for your life. Your life, you will spend 90,000 hours. That's a long time. I just retired from the Coca-Cola company after 20 plus years, I mentioned. Other career stuff behind it. 90,000 hours. The question, and Ben's going to love this, I say this all the time, are you spending time or are you investing time? If you're investing time, you're hoping for a return on investment. If you're spending time, it's frivolous. It goes away. You'll never get it back. So my question for you is that, are you doing that? And if you go to the next slide, if you were like me, you probably are frustrated at some point as a believer in the workplace, in the marketplace. You might be stuck. You could feel stuck there. Or you could actually feel like you are just merely surviving, your head above water. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you why that might be. There's this divide that's out there called the secular and the spiritual divide. And what happens is a lot of people compartmentalize those things. What they learn, they practice on church on Sunday, and they learn on a Bible study during the week, never makes it into their work. They're like an atheist during the week. Monday through Saturday aren't impacted at all by Sunday. And the idea is how do you pull those two things together, that spiritual and that secular, so they overlap like that in the picture? As a matter of fact, 70% of Christians, Barna organization says this, they're a Christian polling organization, that 70% of Christians don't in fact live out their faith in the workplace or don't know how. So I wasn't alone. And maybe you were like me or you know somebody like me, but it's very common in the workplace. If you'll go to the next slide, I know though that other 30% that's out there, there are people that have lived out their faith in front of you in the workplace. And I'm going to do something maybe you're not used to, but I want you to participate with me tonight in this. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask you to turn to somebody next to you and talk for just a minute. That's all I want you to do. And then I'm going to pull it back up front. We're going to talk together as a group because I want tonight to be conversational. Is that okay? So here's what I want you to do tonight. I want you to think about somebody that did a great job living out their faith in the workplace. Do you know somebody that you knew was a believer, or you saw their actions, their behaviors, the way they treated other people? Do you know somebody like that in the workplace, professionally? And what I'd like for you, if you can think about that name, just a first name, I'd also like you to think about one or two characteristics or behaviors that made that person stand out. What are that? So we're talking about the good ones, that 30% that are actively living out their faith in the workplace. Now, I'm going to get you out of your comfort zone. You're probably not used to doing this. We're going to take a couple minutes. Turn to somebody next to you, or threes or whatever. Don't get in groups any bigger than 3 people, because I'm just going to give you about 3 minutes to go through this. And then I'm going to ask for some volunteers. And I know there's some bold people here. I'm going to ask you to speak up and tell us a little bit about your thoughts. Does it sound okay? Does that sound good? So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes. Go ahead and do that real quick, and then I'll pull it back up, and we'll talk about those great attributes of somebody that lived out their faith in the workplace. All right, 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute. Okay, let's bring it back in the middle. Bring it back. Break it down. Yeah, I've got a runner on this. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, bring it back. Bring it back into the middle. I love the conversation. We have a short amount of time tonight. Normally we take more time to do that, but hopefully this will be adequate and appropriate. What I'm going to ask for just 2 or 3 people to do is just raise your hand and tell us the first name and then what made them a great example for living out their faith in the workplace. Don't take more than 30 seconds on this or I'll cut you off. Is that fair? Okay, sounds good. So who wants to go first? Craig, you want to go first? You just got pointed. So Matthew's going to come up. We're going to give you the mic real quick. Okay. And just, again, a name and then why you felt like they were a great example living out their faith in the workplace.
My name is Craig Williams, and his name is Dan. And his transparency, his humility. He's the CEO of the company or the organization.
Did you work directly with him?
Yeah, I work directly with him. He's the reason why I'm there.
Okay, great. What characteristic, that relationship, because of that transparency, where did that take that relationship if he wasn't that way?
It builds trust. I mean, transparency is one thing, but vulnerability opens up that foundation of trust.
Good, excellent. Okay, trust. Craig, thank you. Let's do another one. Who's got one? I'm going to come over to this side of the room over here. We've got to balance it out. Come on, somebody. Help me out. Don't let me... Okay, right here, right back here. Thank you. All right, what's your name? John.
I really think it's, he's the head coach at the side job, the climbing kids club thing that I work at, and he's very courageous, calm and able to kind of control the kids, but like not in a controlling manner, just very, very calm and chill.
He's got a sense of peace about him, a poise, composure, and that helps everybody else stay calm as well. Great attribute. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. So good. Thank you, John. Let's go one more, and it's got to be this side of the room, gang. It's got to be this side of the room. Anybody? Right here. Yeah. How do you say your name?
Yeah,
Romain. Thank you. We're going to give you a mic. You're on the radio. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Romain. So 3 people actually came to mind. One, my current boss, and my last boss, and my last counterpart that I work with. So current boss is Brian, last boss is Matt, and my last counterpart's name is Will. I just thinking about it, they all had a common trait in that they were just not swayed by challenges. They had extreme empathy and their faith was strong. So like if any sort of conflict came about, they just weren't fazed by it. And I believe that kind of do with just their faith in general.
Romain, thank you very much. I appreciate that. That faith overcoming adversity. Let's give all 3 of them a hand. Thank you for participating. Nice job. Thank you for being bold. Appreciate that. Thanks, guys, on that. You know, the interesting thing is that this Barna study called Christians at Work, and they found out that those people that are living out their faith in the work, they all had something in common. They had, next slide please, Zach, they had form before function. Form before function. In this example, what you see on the slide up there is you actually have to have some architectural plans and form, design, becoming something before it actually is put into execution. So architectural drawing into a building. So it's so important that they become who they are before they do something. Becoming before doing. And that becoming for them as believers was becoming a disciple of Christ. It was becoming a Christ follower. Cricket's back there, I love it. It was becoming a disciple of Christ. That was the difference for them. And what do I mean by somebody that is actually a disciple of Christ? Well, there's a group called the Navigators, if anybody's ever heard of them before, and there's 4 basic things that they help people learn so they can grow closer to the Lord. It's not a methodology, but it's things that we stand on the shoulders of giants over the 2,000 plus years that people have done that will help them connect to the Lord. If you'll go to the next slide, I'll share with you what those 4 things are. Number 1, it's about reading the Bible. They read the Bible on a regular basis. They search the scriptures. Number 2, they're in a fellowship with believers. They worship with other people. Iron sharpens iron. They're in that community of believers to grow. They pray. They pray frequently, fervently. They understand how to pray, the meaning of prayer. They don't just pray when they're in trouble. They're always talking to God, praying all the time. And last but not least, they know how to share their faith, and they are also discipling somebody else. Those 4 things. But folks, if you'll go to the next slide, Zach, the sad thing is this, that only 20% of Christians that have made a decision for Christ have actually been discipled. Think about it. It's 1 out of 5 Christians have actively had somebody come along their life and teach them how to pray, how to read the Bible, how to share their faith, and the importance of being connected in community. And so there's no growth there, and that's the challenge. And so what I would tell you tonight, and one of the takeaways that I want you to have tonight, is to become a better leader, it starts first with your relationship with Jesus. Because he will work in you and through you to impact the workplace that you're in. And you don't have to do it on your own. And I'm going to make a quick pivot. Zach, if you go to the next slide here. Tonight, just a simple concept of how leadership and this discipleship idea connect and interrelate. But I put up on the screen simply this is the definition that I've coined for disciple leaders. This, it says, a committed Jesus follower that transforms the culture through God's power, making a difference in their family, their church, their business, and their community. It's being a redemptive influence in your workplace. Was the question that I asked you to answer hard? Is there someone that you've been around before that's been a good example of a believer in the workplace that lived out their faith in the workplace? Was it hard for you to answer that right away? Some people, it's very hard because they haven't been around them. If you'll go to the next slide, here's the deal about disciple leadership. That 28% of the folks that are out there, that 30% are actually living out their faith, and they do some simple, common things. Go to the next slide, please. And these are simply, and I don't expect you to read this chart at all, but these are what we call competencies, ideas behind disciple leader. And what are those behaviors that I asked you about? You remember I asked you, what did the role model look like? What did they do? I heard a lot of the things, those 3 examples we had from Craig, Romaine, and John back there. These ideas around wisdom, sacrifice, confidence, integrity, poise, self-control, resolve, inspiration, development, and transformation. Don't expect you to read all this, but I want to go to the next slide real quick just to give you an example. Preston, a lot of theory there, but how do you pull the needle through? How do you pull the needle through from this discipleship idea of growing closer to the Lord? How does that actually show up in the workplace? Well, one thing I'll tell you this is one way to gain credibility and build influence in the workplace is to make sound decisions, is to become wise. And how do you get wise? Well, you ask God for wisdom, but you're also in His Word. And so to become a disciple is being in His Word and studying what He has to say and seeking out what He has and having a daily quiet time. Some of you might be doing that, others might not. But then once you're having those daily quiet times, you're seeking the Lord and making decisions. An interesting thing about decisions, do you know how many decisions you actually make on a daily basis? Remotely conscious decisions? 40,000 remotely conscious decisions daily. Cornell University says that we make 275 plus on food alone. I wanted to see if that was true one day. I went into the kitchen to see him make lunch. I pulled out the bread. I had 2 options for bread. I had to figure out how many slices I wanted on there, what kind of meat, what kind of condiments. You get the picture. All kinds of decisions that we make, right? But the challenge with that is what happens if you make a series of bad decisions? Get in a downward spiral. If you can make good decisions, sound decisions, doesn't mean every decision is going to work out. It's going to change the trajectory. And here's how that works for living out your faith in the workplace. Because if you are seeking God and His wisdom in the decisions that you're making, business-wise, personally, whatever it is, He is going to show you and help you make those decisions. That's what I call seeking divine input. And you know what happens at work? If you're a believer that's doing this and in God's Word and seeking His divine input, people are going to start seeing that you're making sound decisions over time, and they're going to start coming to you for advice or solving problems. And you'll be considered smart, and you'll rise in the ranks. And as you do that, you'll gain influence. This is not a prosperity gospel at all, though. I want you to know that, because it doesn't mean just because you do some of these things are going to deliver results. But it does show you a competency in what those behaviors look like. So if you go to the next slide, this is the wisdom piece that I just touched base with you on it. And I have these if you want to take a look at it later. I don't mean for you to read all this, but I did want to share with you and pull that needle through. Tonight was really just an introduction for the book that I've written. Let's go to the next slide. Before I go into this, I want to tell you this. Here's the good news. God got a hold of me in 2005. I said, Lord, I need you. You remember I had 2 people quit on me, and I was trying to do it on my own? There was a breaking point. I was at the end of my rope career-wise. I was desperate. I could have gotten fired. They might have phased me out of the company. But I said, Lord, I bowed on my knees. I remember saying, God, I submit myself. I surrender to you. I surrender my career. Even though I became a Christian in 1980, I'm surrendering and giving you my career in 2005. And he made all the difference. That's when the tipping point happened. He changed everything in me, started moving in me and through me to be that spring that started welling up. And I got to do some amazing things at the Coca-Cola Company that I never would have had the opportunity to. I had the opportunity to disciple other people that I never would have had the opportunity to do. But he's been able to work in me and through me to do that. And that's my hope for you. That's my hope for you, is that you will grow closer to the Lord and allow him to work in you and through you. And I want to close with this before I do that. Purpose on Tap has been generous. I can't sell books, and so they bought some from me, and they're going to give them away to you for free tonight. So you're more than welcome. Craig's laughing. He's already heard that joke. But we have some in the back for you. But here's where this is so important. This is an opportunity for you to take a look and say, okay, I don't have a great role model in the workplace, and I need to understand how discipleship and leadership play together. Or I am living out my faith in the workplace, but I don't have a framework to go back and pull somebody along to teach them how to do this. And this may help you do it. Got all kinds of different platform things out there for you. And if you want to scan the QR code that's up there, that'll take you to a website, and you see all that on it. I want to close with a couple things, and I think we're going to go with a Q&A on it. I want to close, if you go to the next slide, with this. I want to read this scripture again to you. If you remember, John 4:14, and beginning with the end in mind, because it's all about a relationship with Jesus. Jesus said, everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst. Not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, that bubbling up. It's going to gushing fountain of endless life. And my prayer for you is this leader's prayer that you see on the screen. And it says this: Lord, when I am wrong, make me willing to change. When I am right, make me easy to live with. So strengthen me that the power of my example will far exceed the authority of my rank. May you be men that are strengthened with the power that your example will far exceed your authority of your role. Thank you. All right, so what do we want to do now? Got questions. We're going to do a Q&A. Rock and roll. Yeah, so thank you. So the question is, how do you find those discipleship opportunities if you don't have them, if you don't have that mentorship opportunity? I'm going to throw it out to the crowd real quick. Any advice on that somebody would want to share in terms of how do you find a mentor? I'm not the smartest guy in the room. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, we are all in trouble. Trust me. Yeah, I see these eyebrows here. I was like, yeah, you're right. Any thoughts? Pardon me? Pray.
Pray for it.
Say it again, Ben?
Pray for it.
Yes, pray. That's right. That's the number one step. Ask God to open those opportunities. Okay, so you prayed. Where can you go find mentors and people that might be able to disciple you and walk alongside you to help you grow in your faith? Church is great. Purpose on Tap, maybe? Yeah. You got people, right? Organizations like that. You're in a place right now. There's some gentlemen here, if you need that, I'm sure that are willing to pour into you, Purpose on Tap, pour into you, and invest in you to do that. What else? How else would you do it? Yeah, the sad truth is only 25% of people out there actually want to grow. That's what the studies show us. And so you have to have a willing party on both sides. How many of you have a mentor or somebody that's discipled you before? Anybody in here? Raise your hand big for me. Okay, so help me. How did you find them? How did somebody come into your life? Pardon me? Common interests, good. Okay, thanks, Frank. Really good. Benton's used to me. I can't hear very well.
Sympathy. They felt sorry for
They were sorry for you. They had pity on you. Yeah. I can see that.
Seeking out fellowship within the church and through that finding an mentor. Just
Okay.
very natural.
Seeking out the fellowship in the church, and it kind of organically, naturally happened to you. So to answer your question, Matthew, there's multiple ways, but I think the foundational thing, if you truly desire a mentor and or discipling relationship, ask the Lord to provide one, and He will. Trust me. He'll open those doors for you. He'll open your eyes to that. He really will. What other questions do you have tonight? I'm open for anything. My favorite ice cream, favorite beer, faith at work. Yeah, go ahead. What's your name?
Tyler.
Tyler. All right. How are you?
Good.
Good.
How do you integrate it into the workplace?
How do I integrate it into the workplace? Do you struggle with that at all? Transparent moment.
Yes.
Yes.
Say, yeah.
That's fair. So Tyler was very transparent up front here, saying that he struggles a little bit about living his faith out in the workplace. And I want to pause for a minute. You're not alone. I can use statistics all day long. I know somebody that's in a corporation in the C-suite, and he's a believer, but he's scared to death to let anybody know because of the ramifications it would have on him career-wise. Because the culture is against us out there. How do you integrate your faith into the workplace? Well, that's the idea behind the book. I'm not going to give you just a punchline behind it. But the idea is this, is that if you're leaning into the Lord, and I'm going to give you an example. One of the chapters, the word was used, composure back here, is poise. It's about prayer. And one of the chapters is about connecting with God through prayer. And as you pray, that will translate then into having a calm disposition, peace. And if you're a leader like John mentioned back there, and you have that poise and that composure where other people don't, and you're trusting God in any circumstance you're in, that will set you apart and set you above. And that's how you live out your faith in the workplace. Does that make sense? It may sound simple, but it's true. It's true. Thank you for the question. What else? Yeah, John. Okay, so let me see if I can summarize your question. You're torn between two lovers. What you want to do and making money, right? Okay. So, I know, I got it. So if you understand, so that's your path. You're trying to understand, though. Do you stay where you are, probably making good money right now?
Or completely go in a different direction that I don't know where that is yet.
And so, okay, and so you're trying to understand what's my next step or what's my direction on it. I'm going to ask the group, because I'm not the smartest guy. What would you do in that situation? Pray. Boy, common theme. Okay, so you're there. Are you there? Have you done that? Okay, so what's causing you to hesitate right now? Okay. Do you know what your strengths are?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. Do you know what your passions are?
For the most part, sort of.
Okay. That's the first part you need to identify in my mind, is you need to start there and seek the Lord through that and understand where your strengths are, your talents, skills, and abilities, and then determine if you're in the right fit. That's what I would do. Who else? Yep, all right. Gang back here. Let's go back here first, Benton, then let's...
Knowing what you know now, what's the biggest advice you give to someone who's early in career?
It'd be the same advice. Let me put it this way. My dad is a 78-year-old retired applied mathematician that went to Caltech, PhD, and he figured out how to track and shoot down missiles. His technology sits on the president's desk right now, regardless who's there. Smart man. I was riding with him last week when I was in Colorado to visit with him, and I asked my dad this. He started a small business, and it's been successful. I said, Dad, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do? There was a pause. He thought a minute. Professor, he's a thinker. He said something that amazed me. He said, I would treat some of the people different than I did. It wasn't about satellites. It wasn't about math. It wasn't about rockets. It wasn't about radars. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about small business. He'd had time to reflect on people. The how, not the what. And so to answer your question, Rafe, is that if I knew then what I know now, I would have been more focused on people than I was on performance. Because I firmly believe that if you're working with and through people and you're leading, the results will take care of themselves. That's my lesson. And that's my dad's lesson too. It was amazing for him to say that. He normally does not say stuff like that. So it's good. Thank you for the question. Ben, I'm going to go right here and I'll come right back. Ben, did you have a question? Mike? Gotta give my son some props here.
This is your son, Ben.
Hi, Ben.
I was going to ask, how do you show a bad boss Jesus?
Say it again.
How do you show a bad boss Jesus?
A bad loss?
A bad boss.
Oh, a bad boss, Jesus. Got it. Okay, bad boss. How many have worked for a bad boss before? Yeah, it's common out there. I've learned probably more, Benton, from working for bad bosses than I have learning from good bosses. And what not to do. If you can get to a point where you're not tainted. I struggled with that. When I had some bad bosses, if you've heard this phrase, the flesh in me wanted to fight back, rebel, be upset. But I found in those times, and I've got a story for you. I remember a guy named at the Coca-Cola Company. And he became a VP, and I didn't respect him. I didn't think he should have been a VP. And I hope we're not capturing this on tape, but that's a real name. We're in the circle, so you're not going to take that out. But what happened with he was a mediocre manager and leader. But what I ended up doing was I surrendered and submitted myself to his authority. You may not respect the person, but you ought to respect the role that person's in. And that's what I did with Dave. And ultimately what happened was we ended up developing a pretty good relationship. And he respected me through that. And I didn't necessarily share the gospel with him, but I was trying to live out and emulate that servant heart in front of him and help him. And I remember that. I remember one of my quiet times just saying, hey, Lord, I don't get this, but here's the choice I'm going to make. I'm not going to try to counteract him or be his enemy at work. I'm going to try to befriend him, try to support him, help him be successful. And that made all the difference. I can tell you I haven't been able to do that with everybody. Haven't been perfect. But that's one example for me. And he put me in charge of different stuff, and it ended up being really good. But he was not a great boss, but that was my choice to do that and endure it. But my son would know I've had plenty of bad bosses where I've come home and it was not a good situation. So, but you did not spare the brunt get the brunt of it. Failed at home.
And are willing to say that in front of your son.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I've been married for 30 years to Carla, my bride. I, as you say in the South, I'm from Colorado, but I learned this being here in the South that I outkicked my coverage. So I married up on all that stuff. I think the challenge sometimes we ran into was during our relocations, where a company would move me from one city to another. And I remember a very distinct argument when we were living in Knoxville, and I was in a position where I was about to be laid off, and we didn't have a chance or a choice about moving to Atlanta or not. And she was planted there, didn't want to go. And I probably said some things that I shouldn't have said to her at that time. But there haven't been necessarily, I'm going to knock on wood and pray that doesn't happen, but I have not been faced with major familial challenges, family challenges. I want to share something with you though, and Benton got to see this. At my retirement party, and this is not to impress you, but it's to impress something upon you. My retirement party at the Coca-Cola Company, I invited some friends. We had about 25 people there, and Benton and my daughter Caroline and my wife Carla got to come and watch it. And we had a time of sharing, and everybody kind of gathered around a circle, if you've never been to one of these before. And it was a time for them to share back to me about a memory that they had or how I had impacted them. And it was a sweet time. But you know, the one consistent thing that they said through the whole thing was, Preston, we always could tell that you put your family first. And you were still successful at the Coca-Cola Company. And you could do that. And that was hopefully powerful for you to hear that as a role model. That if you put God first, if you put Him first in everything that you do, you're going to go through challenges, you're going to experience tough times. That's okay. He's with you. You're going to grow through that. And I stood there in that moment after a 20-year career at the Coca-Cola Company. I had people looking at me and saying, hey, we appreciate you and the example you were with your family. That means that maybe I could be that way too. I don't have to pour my entire life into my career. My family's important as well. And they could see that. My faith, my family, and then work were my priorities. That didn't mean work wasn't important. I worked just as hard as everybody else. But they saw that. So, Calder, I don't know if that answers.
Yes, it did.
It did. Okay,
Sorry.
good. Yeah. Okay, we had a question in the back.
Yeah, I think it kind of falls into the same category, right? Is that college, for being corporate for so long, it probably part of your identity was attached to your positions and what you're doing there, right? How did you transition out of that when you went into retirement? And also, how did you pay attention to that as a Christian living this whole time in your career, right? Like, finding your identity.
Yeah, the identity. I want to share something real quick. I'm reading a book by Os Guinness. If you have not ever read or heard of Os Guinness before and you're searching for purpose and meaning and trying to understand it from a Christian perspective, he'll open your eyes a little bit. It's really good. I'm reading it right now. But he says that finding your purpose doesn't start with your why, like Simon Sinek says. It starts with who. It starts with the Lord, and it starts with a calling. In order for there to be a calling, there has to be a caller. And Jesus is calling you and says, follow me. Come to me. There's an invitation there in that calling. And once you find and hear that calling and walk toward him, you'll find your identity. You'll find your purpose. You'll find significance. You'll find meaning. You'll find value. No other place. It goes back to the scripture I just shared with you. My identity has never been necessarily in work. My identity has typically been in performance and doing things like publishing a book or image or those types of things. And I was mentioning at dinner earlier, not dinner, but earlier, just before we got started, there's a book, you may be not in this stage yet, but you will be someday. There's a book called Halftime by Bob Buford. And some of the guys maybe have read it. There's this thing called the S-curve that he talks about. It's the sigmoid curve. And if I could draw it for you, I would, being the business guy. But ultimately, it shows on the bottom of the axis is time. And then on the y-axis is your career trajectory. And Rick's heard me talk about this before too. And ultimately, your career is going to go to an arc, and then it's going to come back down. And then you're going to retire. And what he's saying is when you get to that point in your life where you're at midpoint, you're at halftime, you ought to start thinking about what you want to do next and what that chapter looks like. So about 6 years ago, I started this journey of writing a book, wanting to public speak, train, and do those things. And so I'm making that transition from what I was doing at the Coca-Cola Company, stepping into what I'm doing right now. If that helps answer that question. There are so many people, again, I say this, you'll be there someday. But someday, when you look back on your career and you move on from your current chapter into something else, you got to know what you're going to do. I'm only 55 years old. That may be old to some of you guys, but it's not. I still got a lot of kick in me, right? So how is God going to use me and what can I do? Craig's like, yeah, that's right. I hear you, brother. Thank you.
They call me old, though.
Did they? Me too. I'm with you. What else? Yeah, right here.
I think you mentioned in 2005 is when you gave your career to God.
Yeah.
And so my question related to that is, what was the hardest thing to give up? Whether it was pride, control, whatever, and how did you go about that?
So thank you. I was fortunate in a leader that pointed that out to me that I need to get it fixed, and how part of it started, I engaged an executive coach. And through the sessions that I went through with her and also pouring over the scriptures in prayer, I realized that the common issue and all the challenges I went through was me. That was the hardest thing to accept. Here's a guy that is a top performer. You talk about identity, it's performance for me. It was. And so when that got swept out from under me, that broke me. It really did. And how do you overcome that? It was really a faith journey, trusting God and walking along Him. It was not easy. It was tearing those layers apart. But He was preparing me for other things that He was having me do. Does that help answer that question? Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Preston.
All right, guys. Thank you.